Wondering how many hours you should practice the violin for best results? In this video, discover how many hours a day you should really be practicing. Hi, I'm violinist Kaye. I work with dedicated adult violinists who desire to develop impeccable technique and to play with gorgeous tone. As busy adults, I am sure you don't have 8 hours a day to practice. And even if you did, I wouldn't advise practicing 8 hours a day. So the answer to this question, how many hours a day should I really be practicing, depends on what your goals are and what you are working towards. For example, practicing for progression, auditions, performances, recordings, or maintenance requires different time amounts. If you are retraining your left hand or your right hand, this also requires a different time amount and a different practice strategy. First, let's talk about maintenance, the least amount of time invested. If you don't want to lose your current level, I would suggest 30 minutes to an hour, 5 days a week. If you are practicing for auditions, concerts, performances, or recordings, depending on the difficulty level of the program and what level you are currently playing at, I would suggest 2 to 3 hours a day, 6 days a week with a practice rotation. What I mean by rotation is that you'd have a specific practice program for Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and a different program for Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. That way you can get everything in only 2-3 hours a day, 6 days a week. No matter what you're aiming towards, I wouldn't advise more than 3 to 4 hours a day. 4 hours is really getting on the border of too much. If you're not able to achieve what you would like to achieve in 3 hours a day, I would start to analyze your practice strategy. Practicing for more than 3 hours a day leads to fatigue and not focused practice sessions. Leopold Auer said, "Practice with your fingers and you'll need all day. Practice with your mind and you'll do as much in 1.5 hours." I would definitely agree. Another famous violinist you probably know, Itzhak Perlman, advises practicing 3 hours a day. His practice formula is 1 hour on scales, 1 hour on etudes, and 1 hour on repertoire. If you don't have 3 hours a day, then break it down. For example, if you have only 30 minutes a day, 10 minutes on scales, 10 minutes on etudes, and 10 minutes on repertoire. I would have to add to that, not to say that I would disagree with the famous violinist Itzhak Perlman, but it really depends on how you are practicing those scales and how you're practicing the etudes and how you are practicing your repertoire if you are going to see progress. You can sit and practice scales an hour a day, 3 hours a day, even 8 hours a day. And if you are practicing incorrectly, you're just going to be ingraining bad habits. If your left hand isn't set up properly, if you're playing with tension, if you're playing out of tune, if you're not thinking about what you're doing, it's a waste of time. And actually, it can be even more than a waste of time. It could be impacting your violin journey very negatively if you're not practicing correctly. So as violinists that come to me and they say, "Oh, I'm practicing an hour on scales every day," I ask them to play the scales for me so I can see how they are playing scales. If there's even one note out of tune, I know that they're not practicing those scales correctly. And if there's no thought to the hand frame setup and no thought to the left hand, there's no need to practice scales for an hour a day. Instead of practicing scales for an hour a day, I would start with practicing with a hand frame, practicing between the 1 and 4, knowing exactly the distance of 1 and 4, playing octaves to know that you're 1 and 4 and your hand frame is set up correctly. And then once you work out the hand frame and do some exercises with individual fingers in the hand frame, then I would suggest going to scales. The same with etudes. If you're just playing the etudes from beginning to end without a metronome, without thinking exactly how you're playing with the bow, how you are using your fingers in your bow hold, how you are getting the bow strokes exactly correct, there's no use in practicing etudes. Finally, treat your practicing like work. When you show up to practice the violin, it's good to be dressed up in a way that you would go to work. Yes, of course, we've all practiced in our pajamas, that's for sure. But when you are dressed up, hair done, makeup done, if you wear makeup, you want to show up to your practice sessions like you would show up to work. Show up with a mindset, show up awake and ready to go. Maybe get a 30-minute exercise routine in before you play the violin. That helps just get those brain juices flowing so you are awake when you approach the instrument and approach your studies. I would also highly suggest keeping track with a journal what you're practicing and what you're working towards, broken down within the calendar, what you want to achieve by a certain date. And you can do that with a regular journal, or you can use one of my favorite programs, Trello. And I'll leave a link here to the video of how to use Trello for your practice sessions. Now it's time for me to get practicing. Ciao!